During my years. The bookstore and art gallery in our community, let's definitely charity and remind people and give out gifts, to see, the person will be online support, period, their efforts in the event that this is one of many that they also, keep that in mind. I think Patrick Oliver found to say about readers and writers, he's been around since 1997. He's loved now. How do we put your books in this day and age of technology, like God maintain this beautiful state in the age of anti. I was there telling you was, to keep pushing, this very no voice. And then what we're trying to do is continue to put books in the hands of young people in the community. My goal is bringing the community together through literature. So that's what we try to do. It's youth books and really bring people together. We talk about important issues and just to have fun. There's a new group around the country called Analog Resistance, where they're encouraging people to get away from the laptop and your phones and get to spaces like this where you can interact with people and just listen to people talk about important things. So you really tell all this is the space to be out there. This is a wonderful authors. But we start off as a deliberate organization targeting young people, trying to get them to understand the powers of diversity, how the diversity can transform your life. It's a possibility to be a young person that enjoy meeting. So I asked one of my students to come and just kind of introduce what is saving lives to you. Let her introduce our special guest and our with so thank you.
Thank you. Please stand in front of me.
Thank you.
What I said was thank you today for coming to see Dr. Dana Williams. And my name is Debbie Jones. I am a former Say It Loud student, and Say It Loud they opened so many doors for me and around me to go on to get my degree in Arabic English interpreting. And because of my just knowing the English language and from Say It Loud, it comes to so many writers' offices and in so many different places. It was opened up to me, and because I was skilled in English, I was able to learn another language. And thank you for coming today and coming to see Dr. Dana Williams as she discusses her book. And the moderator, Dr. Toni Brown. Dr. Toni Brown, thank you. And we hope you enjoyed this presentation. You want to start with hospital? I'm going to it. Thank you so much. I said no, and then I start. I'll say thank you so much for hosting the space. It's a beautiful space. Those who are online, get by whenever you can. The art here is comfortable and meaningful. I mean, the energy of the space is too enjoyable. And then thank you always to Patrick, who I've done so much work with. Story Love Fairies Flower Poetry Center at James Madison University. I have just many times before that I'm not a poet and I don't teach poetry well, so he can help to demystify the process for me. And so part of what we're trying to do with that syllabus project really was to make it very accessible to people to teach poetry and a little bit where resistance to poetry is like on the rise. And I am very excited to be in conversation with Dr. Brown here, and partly because I understand she was a first-year graduate student at Harvard, and what we like to say is we like to train our replacement. Some people want to retire at ease, and one of the ways that you need to do that is to make sure that your students know everything that you think that they need to know to be ready. So, and as a proud Greenwood alum in UAPB territory, I'm also excited to just be in community with other folks from HBCUs to the Atlantis. And so thank you all so much for coming. It's such a pleasure. Shout out to my sisters who are spending the day with me. In part because it's the oldest birthday weekend, and I was telling family in Congo today, she said at Christmas, I think I'm going to artist up on my birthday. So she drives things, like does all this herself. And it just happened that we're artists. So we're just going to trust that she knows what she's talking about all the time, whether we know or not. So
This is a full circle moment for me, and thank you, Mr. Oliver, for allowing me this opportunity to be in conversation with my mentor, Dr. Dana Williams, someone who I held in still hold in very high regard at Howard University. He was very instrumental for me and with my development and in my reading and consuming of Toni Morrison. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. So I do have a couple of questions, but I would like to also have it open to the audience's question and answer. So at any point, if you have a question, I'll just, come to you. But to start us off, in thinking about your work with the Morrison Archive, in Toni at Random, you give us Morrison not only as a novelist, but as an editor, a curator, and a literary architect. What does it mean to encounter her in the archive? And how does that shift our understanding of Black women's authority in shaping American literature?
thank you for the question. So when I started working on this project, I was actually a graduate student at Howard. And I was working in African American drama primarily. My sister and I were talking about this a little bit earlier today, like all of the things we thought we were going to make when we grew up. And at one point I was like, I'm going to be a drama critic. I'm going to be a dramaturg. Like, so in my master's thesis on Black women playwrights, I shifted to African American fiction in part because of a class that was on Toni Morrison actually it was a contemporary African American fiction class. And I remember asking Dr. Traylor, who was my mentor and who was teaching the class, like, I'm enjoying these books, but what do they all have in common? But she casually said, those are the books that Toni ended when she was at Random House. Because they're friends. And I knew they were friends, but still, somebody just like drops like, oh, those are Toni books. And I thought, like, what do you mean as an editor? And I knew, I knew what editors did, and I was thinking more along the lines of copy editing, but I didn't understand what it meant really to go out, attract authors, bring them to a mainstream publishing house. Because she was at Random House, still one of the quote-unquote big five publishers. And part of her work was trying to find authors who might not otherwise see the light of day, and particularly at a mainstream house, if it were not for her. So when I got in the archive, I began to see these letters between her and these writers and these inter-office memos where she was talking a lot about what the book could be and what the market for a book would be in a place where when she would go to meetings, people would tell them that they could not sell these books. Like that Black books wouldn't sell in volume in a general sense, and then they wouldn't sell with white audiences, and then the print run would have to be small, and they couldn't buy ad space. So all these things that they were saying that could not be done. Part of her work was really to say, it can be if it's done well, and let me show you. So watching that play out in the archive and watching her work with the authors, but then also work with the people in Random House, as you said. I'll give you one quick example. When she was publishing a book by Gail Jones, she literally leaves her editorial desk and goes down to the design team, and she's like, that book can't be perfect. My other women's book is perfect. So she knew that people would be looking in the bookshop windows and making decisions, and they would think, oh, I saw that book already, even if it was 6 months ago that they were involved in the book. Similarly, she would have to tell the team, and the advertising team would say, well, we want to buy an ad, or we're trying to get this book reviewed in the New York Times. She would have to say, if I get 2 books reviewed by 2 Black women at the same time, or 2 Black authors at the same time, they're going to put them together whether they have anything to do with each other or not. So she was just being very strategic. And you know that this stuff kind of sort of happened, but when you see it happening and playing out in the archives, you have a whole newfound respect for the kind of work that the archive reveals in terms of how she shaped a whole generation of fiction. And the world of fiction, because she also published some poetry and some nonfiction as well.
Okay, talking about shaping, you mentioned Dr. Traylor, who was very instrumental in shaping my shaping as an instructor. I would remember her just, I don't want to say performances, but just classroom theatrics, and she just one of the most phenomenal individuals. And I'll just share my Traylor story. I remember calling her and saying, hey, it's Sonia. She bought so many stitches. Yeah. And she goes, man, Toni is sick. We have to go see Toni. And I said, let's go see Toni. I never got to see Toni, but so I set that question up to say, what are some of the things that Toni Morrison taught you? And looking back at, the work that you've done and what you've revealed, what are some of the lessons that she's given you?
I think I knew this already, but it was doubled down. I think a kind of trust the universe lesson, in the sense that I was worried about when the project was going to come out. If it was overdue, like how was it going to land? Should it be an academic book? Could it be a straight book? Like what are all of these things that I was just unsure about. And I had a hunch about them, but she decided it's fine. It's fine. Similarly, I think she taught me about the marketing ability of a book. One kind of funny story, it wasn't funny at the time, but I was at Dr. Franklin's house for New Year's party, and Toni Baker's just suggested, like, her New Year's Day salons were just like, everybody was there. Everybody, you were on the East Coast. You just went to our house on New Year's Day, and in your room, there was Toni Sanchez, there would be Amiri Baraka, there'd be Avery Brooks, and then you go upstairs and there'd be like a whole other set of people. In part because she was just incredibly gifted, and a mind that was beautiful enough to not also be egotistically driven. So she had like all these really smart friends and never said at any moment like, why am I not as famous? I mean, she was just a place that they could go to be famous and think out loud because she appreciated that role. So I'm at her house for New Year's Day, and at this point I'm dodging Toni Morrison. I'm like, I don't even want to see her because I'm not as far along in this project as I need to be. Now this is the complete opposite of before, where I would like any opportunity I got, it was like, ooh, how can I be nice and not try to sneak the interview on because we're really supposed to be going so much to about. Like, but I need to ask her this question. So it's the opposite. I'm at the house, I'm like, oh, so she could, send me upstairs to get something. No, full well it's Toni Morrison's upstairs, which did something. So I go upstairs to get it. And I hit the top of the stairs and turn right, and I'm like, golly, Hannah Stores? Like, okay. So she says, how's the book coming? She didn't say hello, she said happy new year. She said nothing. She's like, how's the book coming? And I said, I'm chair now, and I got all these other projects going on, but it's coming along, eventually. And I said, I have a title. And we talked a lot about titles because it's difficult for some authors to come up with titles. So author writes a book, and you just figure the thing out. But the editor is always thinking, what's the title that's going to make somebody pick this book up? What does the jacket look like? Who's gonna look at the table of contents and so on? So I said, I have a title, I'm excited. This is my one achievement. And I say, the house that Toni built at Random. Well, she says, too long. So, in that sense, to answer your question, and she eventually, quickly thereafter, and I was crestfallen with the issue of Toni at Random. And I said, Toni at Random. We're looking in the air for answers. Toni at Random. Toni at Random. Was it work? Toni at Random. It works, Toni at Random. So, okay. So the lesson in that for me was you gotta think about the market for the book too. But I wasn't thinking about it as an academic book that, 200-300 people would read. It would give me some accolades. And at that point I was already a full professor, so I wasn't even looking to go to full professor. But I was like, it'll be an interesting book. It's important to learn about literary history and how books come to be. But she's like, no, that doesn't have to be like this. This can translate into mass market. So I think that was one lesson. So trust the universe, think about market. And then I think it wouldn't be a direct lesson, but from what I found on the page, I think there was a boldness that I think I was like, ooh, I can do that one. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk to us about your writing process. What prompted your desire to do this? And talk to us a little about how the process unfolded, how long it actually took you, and just kind of reflecting thoughts afterwards. Anything would change? Yeah. Are you satisfied? Will there be a part 2? And edition?
I keep trying to cheat the biography intentionally. I don't want to write a Toni Morrison biography. That would be too hard. This is hard, and this is just 14 years of her life. Mm-hmm. So probably not a part 2. But I am thinking about some other work around Toni Morrison. The one thing that I know for sure that I would change, two. One, I put a whole chapter that because I had to get under a certain number, because again, I was thinking of arguability. My editor is telling me, this book cannot be 500 pages, girl. Like nobody's knows about, first of all, bookstores don't have space for 500 page books. They'll buy 20 instead of 40 just because of space limitations. And then a 400 page book is gonna cost too much if you don't have discretionary cash to just drop $50 on a book anymore. So we had a page limit. So I would probably have thought about my word count earlier. They told me the word count, but I was just defining it. And there's a thing to the define. I was like, I can do what I want. And then I had to figure out like how am I gonna cut it. And I somehow thought I was gonna cut we, like I was gonna cut a couple of words in chapter, somehow cut 10,000 words. You can't really cut 10,000 AD whatever. And it was literally. So then there was one chapter that I was trying desperately to keep. And once I saw what the word count was, I'm not exaggerating, the word count was like 9,900 words over, and the chapter was like 9,970 words. So I was like, okay, they're right. The chapter's coming up. I managed to cut 30 words, 300, none. So I would think about the word count going in so that I could have had some of those conversations. And then I think the one thing that still drives me mad is there's a chapter on Forrest Bittker's book, The Case for Black Reparations. And he was a white Yale law professor who had done this scholarly textbook for law school. And I talk about that book and I say it's not until Ta-Nehisi Coates's representation of the case for reparations in the Atlantic that it comes to the front of the public dictionary. And I know Randall Robinson, and I know the debt, and I know how important that book was. I didn't say anything about it. So that hurts my feelings that I didn't either say it or put a footnote in it. But other than that, I'm pretty satisfied. And the process started as I suggested with a dissertation, thinking that I would look for a dissertation. And that's where I think the defiant thing sticks in. Because I told Dr. Stringer, I'm going to do this project for a dissertation. She said, girl, that's too much of a dissertation. You'll never. She didn't do a dissertation on Leon Forrest. Yeah. So, and Leon Forrest was one of the writers that Forrest ended. So then I go to Dr. Shaw, I was like, I'm going to show her. I can't do a dissertation on Toni Forrest's editorship. And then like 6 months later, I was like, oh, I can't do that. And she's like, I tried to tell you so. And so then I say, all right, I'll do any author except for Leon Forrest. And she said, you'll do Leon Forrest. And I was like, how does this work? We need more chances more. Yes, absolutely. In part because people in the field know what's happening in the field, which is also part of the reason why I think I first started talking about this book in 2008. People knew that this book was coming from 2008 to 2025. So it's only been 20 years. It literally. And I was doing small pieces here and there, but I was also staging claim, if you will. So part of the reason that she's also saying Forrest is she's like, I'm listening and nobody's doing a Forrest book. Because I was like, I'm going to do Toni K. Bombard. She's a little on, so I'm doing a Toni K. Bombard book. And at that point, I did learn my lesson. Like, don't say, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. Just go ahead. It's like, you don't have to be hard. Because, I do it while I was going to say it one time. And I say it again, this is your right. So, my writing process with it was starting the Leon Forrest project, and then I moved to the bigger project. Now, this was an interesting conversation between me and Ms. Forrest because I went to do the first set of interviews. And I told her I'm going to do this book on fiction and really try to think about the fiction after 1970, the fiction that you are a part of. I want to put you in conversation with these other writers and novelists. And she said, okay, like anything I can do to help, let me know. And she's thinking specifically about editorship. So after our first interview, she didn't talk about fiction at all. And I'm kind of thinking, I know she knows what I'm trying to do. I don't know why she's like not cooperating. So I think to some degree, she was letting me come for myself into this project as an editorial project and not as a fiction project by itself. So the writing process shifted away from not just the fiction, but more about the editorship. It shifted from an academic book to a trade book. And then I think once I finally got a rhythm and knew this is what I think I want to do, I just woke up early. Weirdly, I still feel very uncomfortable talking about the pandemic being helpful. Because so many people lost their lives. So that is still very painful for me to say, but during the pandemic, I made more progress, not just the commute time, but because everybody at that point had become familiar with Zoom. So all of these authors who I had been trying to set interviews up with, now all of a sudden, like wanted to be in the Zoom space with everybody else is like people want to feel meaningful during the pandemic, and nobody's running as much. So then I get all the other interviews done during the pandemic. Then I don't have free time, as I say, so I can get up at 5 in the morning, and I genuinely with every fiber of my being that if it's dark outside, I should get asleep.
So you're not up at 4 right now?
No.
I'll be honest, we used to think that in graduate school, like, nobody was cranking up the work. Like, she was,
Nobody take it down at 1. Like at 1 in the morning, I used to be out like, oh, but early in the morning, I wasn't a morning person. But the only way that I could get it done while I was doing all my other work was 5:30, and I had a writing buddy who we would log onto the Zoom, and I would literally come downstairs with my eyes closed, turn the bottle on, like put some tea on, because I had that some ritual. Tea, light a candle, Shadowing Smith for the first time, be like, hey, yep, and then we talk about what we're gonna do for the first 90 minutes, all right, see, but then turn the camera off. And it was just the fact that I had somebody that was there that was accountable who would say, because Shadowing was up, meditating at 4:30. So I needed somebody who was going to be up like that. And then it was chapter by chapter, revise, read, try to see whether or not it works, whether or not it gets the rhythm, and then trust also that you have a good editor. And it turns out that the person who was the editorial assistant was highly promoted to associate editor was actually a former student who was a freshman at Howard when I first met her. And English major senior year, she told me I want to get into publishing, and so she ended up working in the publishing house. So when I got the email, I was like, "This is good. What? This is like, yes, this is what you really want." And so it was funny to hear her talk about the feedback because she's like, it was so scary to give you feedback because she's like perfectly fine with everybody else.
Yeah.
Just like this chapter,
I would hate to give the critique.
Yeah, she's like, this chapter's not working. This is what I was like, okay, yeah, I don't believe you, but could you have been nicer?
Yes, you remember that hotel thing where by the torch.
The fun thing too is that for the most part, like on the first draft, I don't get a grade on first draft because what students inevitably do is go to the end and see the grades. Oh, you gotta read these. Yeah.
You spoke to us about some personal moments with Toni Morrison. Are there any stories or anything that you could share with us about your interactions with Toni Morrison? Did you know her personally outside of just interactions with Dr. Trailer?
No, the interactions with Dr. Trailer and the interviews that I did was her one-on-one. But I counted it a complete privilege with the interaction with Dr. Trailer because it was a situation where they were so close that she knew that if Trailer brought me around, that it was still completely comfortable. So it was our first interview, for instance, I asked her, can I record? And she said, I'll be far from candidate if you don't. So at that point, you're like, all right, I can wait on you. I pay attention, so I'm like going on. So I think the comfort of the candor also took full advantage of. And I think that there were times when, because I grew up in the South, especially, and I grew up around elders, I know like how I can run right up against that wall and be pushy, but like don't go so far that it's uncomfortable. So I can do that with her a little bit. I can go right up on the wall and say, I don't think what you're telling me is the full story. Like an example of that would be, we were creating the list together of all the books that she had. She had a list, and I was like, hey, I got this list. And she's like, all right, show me everything that you have. And then she, I got that book. Oh, yeah, that book. Oh, yes, this is. And then we got to where there was, I think it was called The Real Teachers. And I still can't to this day, I don't know why she said that was on her book. No. And I was like, that is your book. Like, I got 20 pieces of paper which you signed as the editor. She's like, that's not my book. And I was like, ma'am, that's your book. And she's like, not my book. So that's when I said, it hit the edge, and I was like, all right, go back up. We have to argue about this. I'm just on the little footnote. He said, all of the documentation suggests that. And there was probably a perfectly legitimate reason. The poet Lucille Clifton, whom I love dearly, was one of her authors. And Lucille Clifton had actually had 2 editors before Morrison. So she would often say, I did edit Generations and Good News About the Earth, but I did not edit like the rest of the books. So she would be clear, she had an editor before me. Same thing with Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan had an editor before. So in those instances, if she became the second head editor, she would say something about it. Conversely, she was the editor for Muhammad Ali, but she didn't contract the book. And essentially ghosted Charles Harris, who actually contracted the book. Like, it was as though he didn't exist. And at that point, I had interviewed Charles Harris. So I was like, so tell me about this thing with Charles Harris. And at that point, she's like, oh, he's recommend digging. And I said, yeah, like Harris. So she said, one of the, Muhammad Ali was in New York, Charles Harris got word that Ali was going to be in New York because of Black networks in Chicago. So someone had told Harris that he was coming, trying to shop for a movie. At the time, Charles Harris was the only Black editor at a major house. So he goes to the airport and picks Ali up before Ali can get to the other publishing house. And Ali goes, oh, they have Black editors at a house? I'm going to leave this house. I'm not even going to take the other meeting. So that's an important part of the Muhammad Ali acquisition story. I think that's necessary to tell. But Morrison did absolutely do the legwork because when Muhammad Ali signed the contract for the book, he had lost his license to box. By the time he starts to write, he has his license again. So you start out thinking, I got all this free time to write this book, but then you get your license back. And so it's 6 years, I think, before he actually starts to write. So she does like all of the hardcore work with the legwork that you've done. Okay. All right, I do have another question.
In tracing Morrison's editorial decisions, were there moments where you saw her consciously shaping not only individual books, but the very contours of the Black literary canon? What can emerging scholars and writers learn from that kind of quiet, decisive power?
Yeah, I would say she was attracted to books that did the same kind of work that she was interested in doing with her books. And so she would say, like, I didn't want to think about the white gaze. I wanted the reader to be a person who looked like me, thought like me. I didn't want, so the example that she would give off is like, well, I thought this was invisible man, invisible to who? She's like, this man is not visible to me. So who are you writing to? So I think she was very attracted to writers who were writing to audiences that were familiar with that work, that she wasn't interested in just trying to be a translator of Black culture. Like, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, I'm going to give you enough context and information, but I'm not going to explain this to you little by little. So I think Henry Dillis, Gail Jones, Toni Cable-Bar, like all of those writers who were literary that she brought on were writers who were really interested in an interior understanding of like who it was, who they were, or what it meant to be a Black person. I think she completely changes the book that we're supposed to get from Angela Davis, because what the publisher Bantam wanted from Angela Davis was a kind of tell-all, and Angela Davis wanted to write a movement book and use her life as a way of thinking about the movement. And so she convinces Angela Davis, you can write that book, and then she goes to bat for Davis when the publisher comes back and says something like, can she just be a little more human? And Morrison fires back, like, typically when they say that, what they're saying is she can't possibly be this good, or is she really uppity or whatever, like, so she's translating down for them, like, no, this is really who she is. And then one example of a non-literary text would be, she edited a cookbook by 10 Black chefs in New Orleans, which when I read that correspondence, I was just so incredibly endeared. Obviously, being from Louisiana, thinking about what it means to have chefs do a cookbook, in part because, and this is how she does the marketing of it, she says, ever wonder why recipes you try from New Orleans cookbooks never turn out the way they do at the restaurant for you at home? Question mark. It's because the chefs themselves have not written these recipes. This is a book written by 10 chefs, master chefs in New Orleans. So she markets it in such a way that says, here is an authentic cookbook for a certain segment of the population in New Orleans, for instance. But one of the reasons that she does it, obviously, is to get those chefs some attention, but also because those chefs have been paid under the table, their time lives have no retirement. So she's like, I gotta get them some money, and I gotta get them their next set of money so that they can join the union, so that they can have some retirement benefits. Because you can imagine you're a chef in New Orleans, you've been cooking since you're 14, 15, even if you were like, started out speaking, if you are 75, 70, however years old, no retirement. So the advocacy and her very clear intention through a relationship with somebody named Rudy Lombard, who is a PhD, but associate sociologist, or not really a sociologist, but a community worker. And they're literally in conversation, like, I have to figure out how to make these shows some money. And he's like, let's do a cookbook. Now, we got real interested because they just started sending the recipes. And the recipes didn't have, like, it's like a pinch of salt, a little bit of Old Bay, well, not Old Bay, I've been married too long, a little bit of, like, Creole seasoning. And so she would write back and she would say, you didn't tell the people to shell these shrimp. You're skipping all of these steps. And they would say something like, any seafood stock will do. And as a cook herself, she's like, people don't generally know how to make seafood stock. You gotta give a stock recipe. And then say, you do this step, and this step, and this step. And so she's enjoying the experiment with a lot of the recipes. So much so that she threw one out and she's like, these freezer bars, I hold it up. I mean, these bars, I hold it up. Like, I put them in the freezer and they're falling apart. We gotta take this recipe out. So I was appreciative of her work towards the culture, for the culture, but then also like just the humanity of it, Okay.
And to open up the floor to questions if there are any.
Still a couple more though.
All right. You experienced Morrison not only as a subject of study, but as a teacher. How did she model literacy as a lived ethic? And how has that shaped the way that you mentor the next generation?
Great question. I'm actually teaching a course at seminar now. And I think the way that I decided to shape that course is in part informed by what I think is the ethic of both her novels, but also her public lectures. I'm thinking about 1995, she gives a chartered address at Howard where she says there are at least 10 steps before we get to the final solution. And when she's referring to the final solution, she's essentially talking about Nazism. Like how you eliminate a whole population of people, genocide against Jews, right? She says it doesn't happen like very quickly, it doesn't happen easily. So that's what the final solution. So she said fascism doesn't show up singularly. There are many steps before there's the final solution for it. Fascism. This is 1995. And I remember thinking, like, these are 20 years. Like, what did that mean? Like, why is she talking about fascism in 95? But remember, it's also at a time where you have the English court, essentially. And so there is this push against authoritarianism, a push against fascism, a push against like an anti-welfare state, war, like all these things are happening. So I mentioned it now to say she saw literacy as an ethical responsibility to say, you can end up in war with a whole other country if you don't understand geopolitics in a real simplified way. You can pretend like going to war against Iran is like far more complicated than you can understand. Mm-hmm. But what she's saying is it's not that complicated at all. And the interesting part about this administration now that we're in now is like, remember, it seemed like so long ago and so many different incursions ago, when Trump was out against Venezuela, I know his team was probably going crazy. He's like, yeah, we want over. He didn't say we're fighting for democracy or whatever. He's like, no, we want over. So there is a literacy that I think she is trying to make transparent that gives us like an ethical impulse, an ethical response to contribute to, like, how do you ensure that democracy stays alive? Because remember, the founders said, like, it's a democracy if you can keep it. It's not inevitable that you can keep it. You have to be able to work to keep it. So you have to be literate to be able to keep it. And that's not just literate on the page. That's like you gotta be literate to culture, you gotta be literate to people, you gotta be literate to energy. Like all of that. So I think that then made me say, in this course in class that I'm teaching this, I don't want to teach just the novels. I really want to talk about what it means for the novel to function in a different way in America. Because the novel in America for a very long time was really trying to figure out an American national identity. Like, what does it mean to not know exactly who you want to be or where you want to be? Because America's only 20, 50 years old. Like, the first thing things like, oh, I'll go 1 o'clock to 12 o'clock. We like 3 o'clock years old. All the way o'clock to 12 o'clock, right? So you're trying to work these things out, and the novel is one way to do it. And she's saying, if the novel can't do it, then there are other ways. I have to give speeches, I have to give interviews, I have to do all kinds of work. So when she does her Nobel lecture, for instance, she talks about the life of the mind. she would like read a short story. So it's important, I think, to think about the ethics of writing and reading and why we do it. Yep, for enjoyment. I do a little bit of both. I love John Grisham. I really love James Patterson when he writes for Bill Clinton. When he writes for Hillary Clinton, like he's got a book about the latest time. I met here in springtime, and we all this stuff during spring break. Along like I like to say,
You start reading the book a week, aren't you?
no, I like the Dean Sharp.
You like really hard to do. Okay, it's really hard. I was like, I gotta read a book a week. She's reading the book a week. I gotta get that stuff together.
I can't do it anymore. Let me tell you, I'm ashamed. And I shouldn't be. Because it's somebody's first language. I'm just saying the audio is fairly.
Like I'm not actually putting paper in my hand.
This is the audio list. So I can't just if I'm in the car, I need to be able to do it. So I think it's important to think about books function in different ways. And the reason I would say I like the Grisham is because I want my mind to work. I want to stay fresh with language, but I'm also like really interested in page turns. But then there are books that I need to do other work. And that's not to say that those books don't have very serious conversations, but there are books that I need to have a different kind of understanding of the world. And I think the African writer E.B. Wakiyango says, there are some things that real world journalism can't explain. Some things you need fiction to help you to interpret so that you can have a three-dimensional view of it. Whereas the journalistic tends to flatten it out as best as it tries to be three-dimensional. So,
I guess my final question is a question about you. Because you have always just been phenomenal. So I would like you to tell us, how did you get this way? Once again, we used to say WWDW. What would they do? And that's how we would measure ourselves as graduate students. Like, if you had this thing to do, you had this other thing to do, WWDW. And she would do it. She would get it done. So I watched your trajectory and what you've done and your movement in leadership and just how phenomenal you are with the bodies and the spaces that you're placed into. So maybe you could let us know a little bit about you and your history. You mentioned you're from Louisiana and you went to Grambling, but how did DW become this woman that is so involved in literacy and literature and teaching African American education at HBCU? How did you become you?
I used to joke, but I think it's serious. I say joke because it's low-key egotistical. That's not the word I'm looking for. You'll have to help me think about it. But I'm like the best of my mom and my dad.
No, man.
How would you describe it? To say like you're the best of anything.
But then you have 3 sisters, right?
Yeah, but they're the best of my mom and my dad.
Okay.
And what I mean is like the good fortune of my father, who was a public servant his entire life and would give anybody anything. And the only time that something happened and one of a family furniture or somebody said something about somebody did something and my mother's response was, you must have done something to the game. Because it was crazy. I'm to the game. Do it good. So that's my dad who will forgive anybody, anything, whatever. And my mother was very practical, I'm going to tell you once, this is the expectation. I would expect anything except excellence from you. You must learn. So it's both of those things kind of pushed up in there again. So I am incredibly generous with my time, even when it punishes me sometimes. I'm incredibly curious because I think that I saw that kind of curiosity around the space, we ended together at the same time. We watched one of the 3 channels, right? ABC, CBS. So we watched the CBS news and we might talk about what was going on, in the world. I then began to watch a little bit more popular culture and stuff. So I remember watching A Different World. And I'm not exaggerating. It was watching A Different World that I began to think apartheid is not bad for Israel. I had never thought about it before. I never thought that it was right, but I had never thought about it. And I had seen on the news there anti-apartheid shit, and I'm okay, you protest. I don't understand what you're protesting about. I'm watching TV and the explanation. So then I'm having conversations about how you should be in the world. And if somebody didn't pay rent, I was a little smart. I was like, we're gonna write this, whatever. So this person, they gotta get out. And he's like, no, everybody deserves like somewhere to stay. And everybody didn't have like was okay. All right. So balancing that out, I think, with like who my mother was, who we used to joke was like sitting right on the edge of the right wing door. Just right on the edge. Okay. Just sitting like real close. My father was probably like very left, very liberal. And my mama was incredibly practical. So you get that mix that I think that becomes a big part of it. Like who I am and how I show up in the world. Curious, but also very rigid and disciplined. Empathetic until I'm not. Because like once it's at the point that I'm like, I've done all the things. Yeah. Like you just don't be trying fun. Like so it's just like I'm a realist. And when you come out of that and decide you want to be something else, I'm still gonna be here for you. But you gotta make sure that you like watch the way that you give over your energy. And similarly, I think understanding that the only reason to read books and understand the world is so you can interact with people. So they also never let me just be like all in my head. It was like, get out there. Public school advocate, had other kids who were supposedly smart in the town, like grew up in a small town where I had to do a little bit of everything. I worked with my peers practically, it's like all of us did. And then like if you did everything you're supposed to, you graduated over to the offices. So I know how to do like all kinds of random stuff because he did all kinds of random stuff. Like I could probably still do a bill of sale right now because of Dover. Just because it was a town where nobody was afraid that if you learned something that you were about to replace. None of that. Now, I'm sure you all remember, right? And I tell my students that still to this day, if one of y'all got something and everybody doesn't have it, I'm not talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. There will be no competition here. There's enough room in the world. Like I have an abundance mentality and not a scarcity one. It's more than enough resources in the world for everybody. We ain't got to hoard anything. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a mix of all of those things. My parents mainly, and then growing up in the space that I grew up in.
Why didn't you write your autobiography or allow your biography to be written?
I just don't think it's something that interesting. I'm not being
right. So arguably, you're the artist of our time in a different industry, the education industry. You have a mural at Grambling. There's been a lot of phenomenal things that you've done as far as the books that you've written, as far as the scholars that you've helped shape and produce. You know, I'll throw my patent out there. If you're looking for someone to write your biography, I would be honored to be that person, to sit with you and the family, get to know the secrets, and write the WWDW book. You know, so
and I'm glad you reminded me of that. So two quick things. One, for me, I was like Jen Jordan. Jen Jordan was that for me. That was Jennifer Jordan. Mm-hmm. And I would literally, as I was working on something, I was like, what would Dr. Jordan say? And I remember telling her that, like I had graduated and I was working on a book project and I said, I need a deadline and I need you to score my like to write comments on my papers. And so she's like, all right, we're peers now. So I'll give you I'll read it with you. But I don't want to be that little thing sitting on your shoulder. And I thought, yeah, but you are. So when the students now say I'm just saying what is she gonna say to this? And they say, what's the classic one? Somebody says something about a shift. And I say, a shift. I'm interested in the shifts in African American literature. And I'm like, my question is always gonna be shift from what to what? So there are certain things that I'm asking questions like to what end? So every time I'm asking, like the student was saying the other day, I'm interested in Morrison's use of her own familial name in some of her novels. And I was like, and everybody was like, to what end? So there's some things that I think are pretty steady state. And so Jen Jordan did that for me. And I think I try to do that for students. And at some point or somewhere there's somebody who's saying, I'm the wild baby or whatever. It just happens fairly naturally. So I think that was important. And I think I've not cleared the space to be able to do it yet, but one of my next two projects, I think, really is going to have some personal narrative in it, because I want to think about the implications of rural spaces, or really what happens when you take all of the resources out of small towns that are Black run and Black owned. And so I think the lens through which I would look at that would be through the one that I know best. I have some reservations about it because I'm not a sociologist and I think, or a historian. So I'm a little tentative about it, but I read Eugene Robinson's book, Freedom Lost, Freedom Won, and he does a beautiful job really of chronicling like the freedoms of Black people in America and the way that those freedoms were won after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, and then how they're lost after Reconstruction, how they're won again in the 1960s, and how they're lost again in the 80s and 90s, and then how they come again with George Floyd, and then they're lost again. So freedom won, freedom lost. And that gave me the model of, I see how we can read the country through a personal narrative. So it wouldn't be personal narrative per se, but familial and kind of physical geographical space, like reading it through Selma, through Mount Bayou, like small Black towns that were determined to run themselves. And when that happens, white flight said, you don't run yourselves, we don't let you run yourselves anymore. And as an American, it's like a really complicated American story.
Can we come to a close by pointing back to the book? If you could give us or give a reason as to why this book is necessary now, what would you tell us?
Two reasons at least. One, the publishing industry has not changed significantly since Morrison was an editor, which is really sad. She started working in 1968. And editors today, there are a couple more editors, probably I'm exaggerating a little bit, but editors of the big five, there are like 6 Black editors, maybe 10 associate editors. So the number is still tiny, 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 tiny. It's a very insular community. And the editors are saying like, you could have picked, this book is 2025. So it's completely relevant just in terms of like what is necessary, like how you have to argue with the author and argue internally with the publisher, how you have to support the author and support, like, so the relevance is as relevant now as it is, as it was then. And it's important to think about like the diversity of books. I'll give you one quick example and hope I won't get back to that too. But what was the case at Random House, which wasn't the case in other places. And so now it was more like this. An editor says, here's a book that I want to do. I want to do a book about, let's say, reparations. And the editor then has to take that book to a committee. You're the only Black person in the room. So what do you think? I don't like it. They don't even think. Don't see how it could work. And by the time it comes back to you, 10 people have said, yeah, or 8 people have, and one person's like on your team. You never get a book out. Except for the formula that when you start to discover people are willing to accept a particular kind of Black book, then that's the only book you pitch, because that's the only book that everybody in the room says, oh yeah, we can sell that book, we can sell that book. So it's important to think about like how book making, book buying, how it works, and why it's important to have diversity in the spaces, because people are diverse, right? So that's one part of it. The second one is much shorter, but related. We tend to think that we want the books that we see. You go to a bookstore and you're like, I really think I want a self-help book, or I want a whatever kind of book. When the reality is editors have dictated for you what you want to read and you have no idea. So the best example of it to me is like that Miranda Presley example. Exactly. The Devil Wears Prada. She's like, you think you want that bargain bin sweater. But somebody decided, like a whole fashion industry made this decision, and now you think everybody wants olive green. And you're just like, I want an olive green sweater. That's because the industry has made you think you want an olive green sweater, because olive green sweaters are everywhere. So we think we want a certain kind of book, and an example kind of contemporary would be like a Terry Gone book, or I'm dating myself, that's the 80s. Let's say a Ta-Nehisi Coates book. So that now they're like, this is the book that sells. So everybody wants this, like the industry is making that decision for us. And we have a whole lot of power that we don't use because we don't know that we have. that we could use it. So,
And these are individuals or
the book buying public.
Okay.
If book buyers said, this is the book that I want, these are the kinds of books, and you can do that with your resources and supporting it. I mean, that's certainly what happened with people who did independent work before they got picked up by publishers, because people were saying, that's the book I want to read. I don't see that book anywhere else. And then publishers say, okay, I become a yeah. Okay. No questions?
Questions.
Stick to that question.
Go ahead.
Who's your favorite authors? Like, who's your favorite kid? Or who's your favorite? What do you like to receive? You know, captures. What do you do?
Here lately, she doesn't put as many books out as I read all the Alex Cross books. Sometimes instead of grading papers. But I like Stacey Abrams. She was writing earlier on as Selena Montgomery. I like more of the Stacey Abrams, the Avery King series. I am reading along with probably most of the rest of the world T.R.A. Jones's Ken for spring break. Ken just came out earlier this week, and I kind of sort of knew it was going to be an open book club pick. In part because I'm watching T.R.A. on social, and she's like, now I got to sign 24,000 pounds. I was like, yeah, over my biggest book. Like, there's because book buying. I remember asking my publisher, I was like, hey, what are sales? Like, in the first month, she said, like, don't worry about sales. I was like, no, I'm not worried about sales. What are sales? And she said, we're just about 4,000. I was like, 4,000? I've been hustling. Like, I'm like, this is right. And so she's like, for perspective, Eric Holder was the entire Attorney General of the United States. And the first 6 months, he sold 4,400 books. Mm-hmm. So she said, what you really want to do is ask about your Audible downloads. And I was like, okay, what about Audible downloads? I was like, I feel like I've been working really hard. So when somebody says this, their first word is going to be 25,000 books, there's a reason. Because nobody gets a run of 25,000 books. So I really like T.R.A. Jones. Like Jasmine Ward. Poets love Evie Shockley, Jerome Brown, Patrick Oliver. I think, and not just Miss Patrick Sear, you know. Nonfiction. What's something that I'm getting no matter what? I'm buying an Ivy Cuellar book. Like his last book, Eloquence of the Scribes, or Wale Soyinka. And I'm trying to, I show my bias to his African writers, because there's a certain kind of liberation I think that's there with African writers, because they aren't writing for an American market. But England has transitioned, of course, but Wale Soyinka and Ivy Cuellar. I'll stop there. And I'm trying to balance out men and women too. Yeah. Was you guys? Okay. Mm-hmm. Many of which they didn't ask this, but I'm pretty sure they want to know. What's your favorite Morrison book? Song of Solomon. Did you ask something? I said, oh, okay. Yeah, Song of Solomon. Because it works for so many different ways. I reread Beloved with the class, and that book is smarter than I thought it was. I thought it was smart all along, but I thought it was too smart, to be honest with you. Because I was like, there's just no way, like, there's too much going on for you to be able to get it. Mm-hmm. But this time I was like, whoa. I'm a Sula girl. Sula has lots of circles for me, and I just get intoxicated and caught up in it. The one I'm gonna have to take a class on jazz. I don't know what's happening with jazz. I just get that. Yeah, I just don't. You done? You done?
Hey, Beth, quickly, the one of the ways you had was through your spouse Commission Center. Mm-hmm. You talked about the Dead Syllables Project, Oklahoma Black Poetry, which is Syllables Project was created by a group of individuals who were expected from the United States. And I'm happy to say I really need two people who want to Arkansas who were chosen to be part of the project, like Toni Harshaw, who works here, her mother works here, actually. Now, father was saying I'll bring down, and he, the Holland was not available, but they both were part of the development his syllabus that is now available online for free for educators to utilize to celebrate that origin.
So Patrick and I were both on the board for the Furious Flower Poetry Center, and it was the center itself emerged out of Joanne Gavin's kind of commitment. I mean, that seems like an understatement, but just a determination to celebrate Gwendolyn Brooks. So the idea was we're going to celebrate Black Deliverance and we're going to bring everybody together. We're going to talk about Black poetry. We're going to talk about the deliverance. And everybody loved it. And it really was like a way to just bring all of the people together to think and to talk about books and African American poetry. And Nikki Giovanni gets on board and it becomes larger than life. And then the next thing you know, she's like, we're going to do another one in 10 years. And then the center comes into being. And there's a board of directors for the center. Right with, I think it might have been, was it the first Trump administration when they were kind of rollbacks on DEI were mild, but then when they became very aggressive, and especially in the state of Virginia, which at the time had a Republican governor, and it was, you can't teach this, you have to be hands off. And so we stopped thinking kind of domestically or in Virginia, but to think like, how do we make sure that people can continue to like really think about and teach poetry nationally or internationally. And it was one of those situations where a board recommends something and then the board said, and we can't give this to the staff to leave. We have to do this ourselves. And so every board member, a couple of retreats and every board member recommended 2 people, poets, K through 12, public school educators, faculty. And what we tried to do was to say, here are some major poets, and here's some ways to think about teaching poetry to kindergartners, all the way to 12th grade, all the way to college, and all the way to graduate school. And importantly, too, we said we wanted it to be open access so that anybody anywhere would like just be able to download this, wouldn't have to pay for it, because if we had gone to a university press, that easily would have been a $150 book. Easily. And we wanted to make sure that people could continue to think about poetry. It wouldn't be intimidated by poetry. It wouldn't be intimidated by teaching poetry. So it's got videos, it's got actual poems, it's got some original poems by some folks, but it really helps you to think about reading poetry, like the art of reading poetry. In part because poetry is one of the ways that we can communicate resistance fairly easily. During the Black Arts Movement, it was, first of all, nobody had time to sit and write a book. Like the world's on fire. You can't write a whole novel. And then if you did, everybody was like mimeographing at their job, right? You can't mimeograph on the whole novel and pass it around in the same way. So plays and poetry. And so the poetry has always been this genre that has been a resistance genre. And so that project allowed us to really think about how you can use literature to help people like resist. Yeah. We appreciate you all.
And yeah, we appreciate everything. Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for everybody for coming. Dana, you want to begin? Thank you.
Yes.
I want to give a big thank you for Dana. She was nominated for the individual. And today, we are actually in Los Angeles presenting the award for the winner. And Daniel could have been there at that event. Michelle Barney and others. But she chose to be with her sister for her birthday and to be here with her.
That's right.
So she's here with us on the event on the red carpet in Los Angeles, where she's here on the red carpet.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Yes.
Thank you for your signing books.
Because you're excited.
Absolutely. These two are to give us good friends.
They made great gifts. Thank you for your interview. You know, like some others. I really, you know, fun.